What if the very things that bind you are no match for your calling? What if God could bypass every human limitation, every security system, and every plan of the enemy just to remind you that his power is not confined by human understanding? In the thick silence of the early church's persecution, there echoed this question: would God show up again? The believers had seen signs and wonders, yes. They had seen Jesus crucified and risen. But now, as persecution swelled like a tidal wave, they wondered, would the miraculous continue, or was that era over? Jerusalem was bustling with tension. The Roman presence was heavy, especially during the Jewish festivals. Pilgrims filled the city. The air was tight with religious fervor and political fear. Herod Agrippa I, who ruled Judea from 41 to 44 AD, knew how to please both the Jewish leaders and his Roman patrons, and he used that influence to target the one thing both groups feared: the movement called the Way. It was more than religion, it was a revolution. But not with swords or riots, with prayer, with healing, with transformed lives. That kind of revolution terrified kings, and so they sharpened their blades. Herod wasn't merely a ruler. He was a master manipulator, educated in Roman politics and Jewish tradition. He knew which strings to pull, which speeches to give, and which enemies to eliminate. His first strike was brutal and calculated. He ordered the execution of James, the son of Zebedee. Not just any disciple, James was one of the inner three, one of Jesus's closest, a man of thunder. The news hit the believers like thunder itself. They had seen persecution before, but this was different. This was an apostle, killed, with no divine rescue, no last-minute miracle. And Herod, he smiled. He saw the cheers from religious leaders who detested the Christ followers. If James pleased them, Peter would thrill them. Peter was the face of the movement, the preacher at Pentecost, the one who healed the lame man at the temple, the one who had once denied Christ, then led his church. Herod wanted Peter's head not in secret but in spectacle. Peter was captured quickly. Soldiers stormed his location, likely with tips from informants who had infiltrated the church. It wasn't difficult. The believers were generous and open, and the enemy exploited that love. It was during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, a high holy season. Herod, ever shrewd, waited for maximum attention. The city was overflowing with visitors. The courts were closed for the feast, so he delayed the trial until after Passover. But he didn't want to risk another escape like last time. Peter had been jailed before and angels had intervened. Not this time. Herod assigned 16 soldiers to guard one man. 2 were chained to Peter, 1 to each arm. 2 stood at the door. The other 12 rotated in shifts, patrolling the prison. The chains were triple locked, the gates reinforced. This was maximum security, ancient style. To Herod, Peter was already dead, just waiting for the show. But Peter had a different kind of security. The cell was a damp, narrow chamber with stone walls stained by years of despair. The only light came from a narrow opening high above, casting a sliver of moonlight that moved with the hours. Rats squeaked in corners. The guards, battle-hardened Roman soldiers, stood motionless but alert. Peter lay between 2 of them, each arm chained to one. The iron links were heavy and cold, but Peter's heart, at peace. He remembered Jesus' words to him on the beach. When you are old, someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go. That was prophecy. Was this its fulfillment? Peter didn't know, but he wasn't afraid. He had walked with Christ. He had seen the empty tomb. He had witnessed the power of the Holy Spirit. If death was next, he was ready. He had run from it once, the night he denied Jesus, but not this time, not anymore. So, surrounded by soldiers, Peter fell asleep. While Peter was under maximum guard in the dark, damp prison, the church gathered with urgent desperation. They had no weapons, no lawyers, no political clout, but they had something Herod did not understand: intercession, prayer. They met at the home of Mary, mother of John Mark, a large house known for hospitality and safety. The lamps burned long past midnight. Some knelt, others paced. All lifted their voices to heaven, whispering and wailing. Their prayers weren't eloquent. They were desperate. "Lord, spare him. Don't let Peter die like James." Some had faith strong enough to believe in a miracle. Others simply didn't know what else to do, but the room trembled with belief, however fragile. They called on the same God who had rolled away a stone, who had raised Jesus from the dead. Maybe, just maybe, he would intervene again. Little did they know, as they prayed, the heavens were already moving. The execution was set for dawn. Peter's name would be shouted by the executioner, his body displayed to frighten the church. That was Herod's plan, but heaven had written a different script. In the dead of night, the angelic realm stirred. One angel was dispatched, carrying divine orders. The jail was silent, but spiritual forces buzzed with anticipation. The angel appeared in the cell, and suddenly the room flooded with a radiant light. It didn't flicker like torchlight. It pulsed with purity, a holy brightness that no wall could contain. Yet the guards didn't stir. Their eyes remained open yet blind, their ears deaf to heaven's movement. The angel approached Peter and struck him gently on the side. "Get up quickly," he said. Peter awoke, groggy but alert. As he began to move, he heard a metallic clink and then silence. The chains that bound him fell to the ground, broken by no hand but heaven's. And Peter, half in disbelief, obeyed. The clang of metal against stone echoed in Peter's ears. He looked down, expecting to see broken links, twisted by some tool, but they lay perfectly whole, just opened. He rubbed his wrists, half expecting to feel pain or bruising. There was none. The guards on either side still breathed rhythmically, motionless as statues. Their hands rested on sword hilts, but not a finger twitched. It was as if time itself had paused for Peter. The angel, radiant and calm, gestured quickly. "Dress yourself and put on your sandals." Peter obeyed, his cloak trembling in his hands, his heart beat wildly in his chest. Was this real? A vision? A dream? Could deliverance look this ordinary and this divine at once? The angel continued, "Wrap your cloak around you and follow me." Peter hesitated just a second. Then he followed. Step by step, Peter followed the angel. They passed through the cell door. The guards posted outside didn't react, not a blink, not a turn. Their spears stood still, pointed to the heavens, unaware that heaven was walking past them. They continued through the first gate, then the second. Each gate should have required keys, commands, unlocking, and escort, but tonight the locks clicked open by unseen hands. Peter looked back. Still nothing. Still silence. The angel didn't speak, only led. Peter thought, "Am I dreaming? Have I died?" They approached the final gate, an enormous iron monstrosity that opened to the street. It groaned from decades of rust and was guarded by at least 4 men in heavy armor. But before Peter could worry, the gate creaked and opened by itself. No hands pushed it. No guard touched it. It just opened. Peter stepped onto the cobblestone street. The cold air rushed into his lungs. The smell of bread from a distant bakery mixed with the soot of torches and the sea salt breeze off the coast. And then, just as suddenly as he appeared, the angel was gone. No farewell instructions. Just gone. Peter stood in the middle of the street, the glow of the moon lighting his face. He looked around, chest heaving. "Now I know without a doubt," he whispered, "that the Lord has sent his angel and rescued me from Herod's clutches and from everything the Jewish people were hoping would happen to me." His legs, weak from shock, began to move. One step, then another, then a full run. There was one place he knew to go. Mary's house. The house was packed. Lamps flickered, casting shadows on praying faces. The air was thick with incense and intercession. Some wept, some whispered. Others had fallen asleep on the floor, still clinging to hope. A knock came at the gate. Rhoda, a young servant girl, looked up. Probably a neighbor, or worse, a Roman soldier. But something in her spirit told her to check. She tiptoed to the door.
"Peter!
"Who is it?"
Is at the door!"
she whispered. A voice answered, out of breath. "It's Peter." Rhoda froze. She knew that voice, but it couldn't
No!
be. Peter was in
Peter
chains.
is at the door!
Peter was going to die at dawn. Tears welled in her eyes. Her breath caught. She didn't open the door. Instead, she ran back inside. "Peter is at the
Peter
door,"
is at
Rhoda
the door!
cried. The prayer circle paused. Heads turned. One of the elders looked at her with a mixture of pity and irritation. "Child, you're imagining things." "No, it's him," she insisted. Another said, "Maybe it's his angel, his spirit. He's all ready." The words hung in the air. Peter knocked again, this time louder. Thud, thud, thud. Finally, someone ran to the door, unlatched it, and gasped. There he stood, cloak wrapped, hair tousled, eyes wide with urgency and wonder. Gasps turned to cries, cries to worship. He stepped inside and motioned with his hands. "Be quiet," he said. "Let me tell you everything." The door shut quickly behind him. Peter leaned against it, chest still rising and falling like waves. All eyes were on him, dozens of faces, wide with astonishment, some with tears, others' mouths agape. He lifted his hands again, asking for silence. Slowly, reverently, he began to speak. He told them how the light had filled the cell, how the angel had struck his side, how the chains had fallen without a hand, how they had walked past guards who didn't see, how every iron gate opened by itself, and how the angel disappeared into the night. With each detail, the tension in the room transformed into awe. Gasps became murmurs of worship. The Spirit of God settled like a heavy mist upon the house. They had been praying for deliverance, and now stood face to face with it. Peter, breathing slowly now, said, "Tell James and the brothers." James, the brother of Jesus, had emerged as one of the church's leaders. News of this miracle must spread to all the believers. Then Peter looked around. "I must go." A chorus of protests rose, but Peter was resolute. "If Herod finds me here, many will die." With one final nod, he slipped back into the shadows of the street. As the first hints of dawn broke over Jerusalem, the guards awoke in terror. The chains were still in place, but Peter was gone. A cry of alarm echoed through the prison corridors. Soldiers shouted, doors slammed open. The captain of the guard stormed in, demanding answers no one could give. Prisoners leaned against the bars, whispering about a ghost, a miracle, a jailbreak. But none had seen it. None could explain it. Word traveled fast. Herod was awakened. He demanded Peter be brought to him at once. Then came the report. Herod's eyes narrowed. "He is gone?" The trembling messenger nodded. "And the guards? Still at their posts. They swear he vanished. No one saw him leave." Herod's face darkened like a storm. He clenched his jaw, the veins in his temple pulsing. "Find him. Search every alley, every rooftop, every house. Turn the city upside down." But they found nothing, not a trace. Days passed, and still no sign of Peter. The people whispered about angels, about divine rescue. Herod's power looked weak. He hated that. In fury, he interrogated every guard. No answers, no confessions. He threatened, he cursed, he demanded. Finally, in a fit of rage, he sentenced all 16 guards to death. In Roman law, if a prisoner escaped under your watch, you received his punishment. In this case, execution. Herod believed this would send a message, but the message it sent to the church was different. God had moved, and no earthly king could stop him. Humiliated in Jerusalem, Herod withdrew to Caesarea, the political jewel of Judea. There, the amphitheater was grand, the sea air refreshing, and the flattery abundant. It was there that representatives from Tyre and Sidon came to seek peace. Their cities depended on Judea for food, and they feared Herod's wrath. They courted his favor, bribed officials, and prepared a day to honor him publicly. Herod dressed in royal robes woven with silver threads that caught the morning sun. As he entered the amphitheater, the crowd erupted in orchestrated applause. He gave a speech, and the people shouted, "This is the voice of a god, not a man." Herod smiled, but heaven frowned. Immediately, an angel of the Lord struck him down, not for his cruelty, not for the executions, but because he did not give praise to God. Worms consumed him from within. The man who tried to kill a servant of God died in filth, disgraced and devoured. And the word of God, it spread more than ever. The execution failed, the prisoner vanished, the king died in disgrace. But the mission, it thrived. Peter's escape wasn't merely an act of divine mercy. It was an act of divine strategy. God was preserving the voice that would still preach, still lead, still guide the early church through storms yet to come. Every part of the escape, the timing, the location, the silence, the angel was orchestrated not just for Peter's sake, but for the mission. The church would now testify to kings and to commoners that not even Herod's prisons could cage the word of God. Even in hiding, Peter continued to write, to pray, to disciple. And the believers, strengthened by this miracle, spread further and wider than ever before. It was not just a jailbreak, it was a sign. God is still with us. The ripple effect was unstoppable. From Jerusalem to Judea, and now to the ends of the earth, the word began to race like wildfire. Paul and Barnabas prepared to depart on their missionary journey. Philip continued evangelizing in Samaria. John Mark took notes, quietly chronicling these events that would one day shape the Gospel of Mark. Every home church that heard Peter's testimony burned with new fervor. If God could open iron gates for Peter, he could open the hearts of Gentiles. If chains could fall from wrists, sin could fall from souls. The church advanced not because of strength, but because of surrender. Not because they were clever, but because they were committed. Peter had walked through a locked cell, past guards, through multiple gates, and into freedom. No army, no bribes, no protests, just a silent walk into the miraculous. What others saw as impossible, God saw as a hallway. Sometimes, what you think is a wall is actually a door in God's kingdom, but it only opens when you move forward in obedience. Peter didn't need to know the whole plan. He only needed to take the next step. That is the nature of faith walking even when the path isn't visible yet. Of all the strange details in the story, one of the most remarkable is this. Peter was asleep, not just resting, deeply sleeping. On the eve of what was supposed to be his execution, this wasn't resignation, it was trust. Peter remembered the one who calmed storms with a word, who told him, "Feed my sheep," who promised that death was not the end. The peace that surpasses understanding had wrapped itself around him like his cloak, and in that peace he rested. If Peter could sleep in a prison, perhaps you can sleep through your storm. The believers who gathered in Mary's house didn't break Peter out. They didn't smuggle in weapons. They didn't storm the gates. They prayed, and heaven responded. Though their faith was imperfect, some doubted, others thought Rhoda was mad, still they prayed. And God honored their persistence more than their perfection. Prayer is not passive. It is not wishful thinking. It is alignment with the purposes of God. It is permission for heaven to invade earth. And on that night, Their prayers shook the invisible realm. An angel was dispatched. Chains fell. Doors opened. A miracle walked out of prison. Peter's escape opened more than a gate, it opened the eyes of the church to a deeper reality. Angels, those mysterious messengers of heaven, weren't just stories from old scrolls. They were active, present, watching. The book of Hebrews would later remind the church, are not all angels ministering spirits sent to serve those who will inherit salvation? That night proved it. The church realized that heaven's army stood guard even when the city turned against them. Believers began to pray with new boldness, sensing that the spiritual realm was more involved than they thought. Children asked about angels. Elders testified of dreams and visions. The church's awareness of the supernatural deepened. Peter's angel had no name, no sword, no grand speech, just a task, just obedience. And in doing so, the angel wrote a chapter of divine history. Peter's story became a mirror for many. People began to ask, what chains am I wearing? Not all chains are iron. Some are shame. Some are fear. Some are addiction, bitterness, doubt, regret, pride. The early believers shared testimonies not just of Peter's escape, but of their own. A woman let go of a long-held grudge. A merchant gave up dishonest gain. A man confessed secret sins and found healing. The physical miracle in Peter's life stirred spiritual freedom in others, because when God breaks chains, he doesn't stop at wrists. He goes for the heart. What stunned many about Peter's escape wasn't just that it happened, but how quietly it did. No thunder, no earthquake, no blinding fire. The angel didn't shout. The chains didn't explode. The gates didn't crash open. Everything happened in silence. God moved without spectacle, but with precision. It taught the church a vital truth. Not all miracles are loud. Sometimes God moves in whispers, in nudges, in unnoticed hours. You may not see the gates opening yet, but if you're walking in obedience, they are already swinging wide. Herod had planned a spectacle, a trial, a public execution, a triumph. Instead, the people got a missing prisoner, a frightened guard force, a dead king. God has a habit of rewriting endings. Joseph was sold into slavery, then saved a nation. Daniel was thrown to lions, then promoted by kings. Jesus was crucified, then rose from the grave. And Peter? He was chained for death and walked into freedom. When you surrender to God, your ending isn't final until He writes it. Life lessons from a prison break. So what can we learn from Peter's midnight miracle? Get it answers prayer even if your faith is shaky. Hardships isn't the absence of danger, it's the presence of trust. Angels are still on assignment. Chains, physical or spiritual, cannot hold God's people when He decides it's time. Somnolence doesn't mean inactivity. God moves even when you can't hear Him. Obedience opens doors, even miraculous ones. Peter's story is not just about escape. It's about hope. It's about the unstoppable purpose of God. It's about how one man's obedience, one church's prayer, and one angel's mission changed the world. So, the next time you feel bound, blocked, or broken, remember, chains fell off. Here are some reflection questions for you. 1. What chains in your life feel unbreakable? Do you believe God could break them supernaturally? 2. Have you ever seen God work quietly behind the scenes, opening doors you didn't even knock on? 3. God showed up for you today. Would you be ready to follow even if you didn't understand where He is leading? If this story stirred your faith or gave you hope, don't keep it to yourself. Like this video to encourage more people with God's truth. Comment below what was your biggest takeaway from Peter's miraculous escape. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more powerful Bible stories brought to life every week. Your miracle might just be one story away.